Hey there, everybody. I'm Rick Morton. Welcome to the table. This is our second episode of our little podcast that we're starting here. And just to remind you from the first episode, or if you're just joining us for the first time, just we are really just a group of friends and fellow journeyers through the world of child welfare, just believing that God has called us into this. And the inspiration for this podcast was really the fact that we've had a lot of conversations over the years among us and have talked through issues. And we just feel like that there need to be more tables like this, and there need to be more opportunities for us to come together and talk about issues and hard things in light of the gospel and in light of the journey we find ourselves on. And so I am privileged again to be joined by friends at the table. Emily Richards, welcome. How are you?
Doing well. Honored to be here. Thank you, guys.
Well, we are honored to have you, and so excited to be able to do this, and have loved the work of Show Hope and the things that you've done in advocacy over the years. And you've just been such an important friend, an important voice. And so it's always an honor to sit down and talk to you. And then my buddy, Herbie Newell. Herbie, welcome to the table.
Hey, thanks, Dr. Rick. We're grateful to be here, right? And anytime all of us can get together and mock your age is the best.
No.
I really do. I feel a little bit like a senior citizen in this group. I'm having a moment where I'm thinking about coloring my hair right now and turning just to be able to hang with you guys.
No, you're the
So,
sage.
wow, we are in real trouble today. Then,
Okay.
but no, like I said, the funny thing about us getting around a table at a conference or in a meeting or something is that we end up kind of moving through a lot of different topics and a lot of different things. And so we're just going to try to, from time to time, throw out current events or things that are happening around us or things that are on our mind and just talk them out. And so
Awesome.
today, very first thing is we're going to talk about an article that was actually published in early February. It was in the Washington State Standard, and talking about the struggles in the child welfare system, particularly in the state of Washington. And and I don't know that we want to necessarily point a finger at Washington at this point, but just to say that, through deaths and some struggles that they've had in the system there have been some things that have come to light. But the struggles in Washington are not different than the struggles in all 50 states or in, many of the nations that we're all engaged in. And so just want to really kind of talk through the child welfare system and its brokenness and our response as believers. What do we do? How should we do? And so, Emily, you've got this all figured out, right?
I got it all. All right.
But
Y'all
like, where do you,
pull up your chairs. Let me
there you
know.
go. That's right.
My
But,
goodness.
where do you start in the midst of such an immense problem?
Right. Goodness. Yeah, I feel like we just a moment of silence for how difficult it is, right? And we've had the privilege of being at this work alongside one another for a little bit of time now. And,
Yeah.
there's nothing new under the sun in the sense that we continue to come up against, and we know our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? And so I think we have to recognize that there's an enemy that absolutely detests life and all that encompasses, right? And so I think acknowledging that when we step into this arena of like, okay, and taking the faces off of, this isn't that person or even, that party. Like this is a issue that is bigger, and letting that be what unites us as we move toward, okay, how do we take this moment of time that we're in and the systems that we operate within and bring hope. And, I think a lot of it as with our role as Show Hope and engaging the church and faith-based groups, certainly this idea of the government isn't meant to fix the world's greatest problem. People are, people being neighbors, people being community for one another. And so you've got a lot that you throw into this pot of we're increasingly isolated, we're, increasingly busy. And so, these issues that you look back at our ancestors, like if the community was, um, if there was like an integral issue within the community
Mm,
creating some sort of weak point, that was detrimental to the whole community. And so it
right.
demanded a communal response, right? And I think that's deeply part of our the imago Dei that we bear as human beings made in the image of a relational God. So you've got a lot going on here, but I
Yeah.
think there's this recapturing of what it means to be human, what it means to be human alongside other humans, and then holding on to that like microdosing of hope. Where are these little places that like the problem is so big, and I think that
Yeah.
that is where most people's engagement stops. Is like it's so big.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we can go, no, if we actually had that one conversation and looked in the eyes of that birth parent that's, on the verge of TPR or what that might look like, if we had that one conversation with a caseworker and encourage them, because we know every caseworker is burned out, like that's microdosing hope
Mm,
into the
mm.
to the problem. And I think that makes it feel like, okay, we can be in this together. I don't know. Those are opening thoughts.
I love that. I love that term, microdose and hope. That
Mm.
is powerful. Herbie, what do you think?
I don't want to dive in too much and too deeply into this article, but I think something that we've been working on for a long time, and I had the opportunity to be on the American Enterprise Institute's foster care panel. And one of
Yeah.
the things we've been looking about foster care and that this article tackles is the drug epidemic and how it's impacting kids in foster care. And one of the things that I know for Lifeline as we go to Capitol Hill, as we go to talk to lawmakers, we talk about that the libertarian mindset towards drugs, towards marriage, towards this free expression of
That's
ideas,
right.
it ultimately impacts the most vulnerable among us. So children are the most vulnerably
That's right.
impacted when
That's
we
right.
relax laws, when we make things that are easier for adults to survive, but they ultimately end up hurting children. And so
Mm, mm.
I think the sad thing when you look at what's happened in Washington State and Oregon and California are also states that have said through their laws, we're not going to have an automatic pickup order. We're not going to open up a case or investigation if there's a usage of drugs or poverty in the situation of child welfare. And I think what we're seeing in Washington State and others is that there is a long term downward spiral and an impact and effect of that. And I think going back to God's word in the Bible, I think it just reminds us this is why God has order and purpose. It's not
Mhm.
for the lack of human flourishing, it is actually for human flourishing. And so he has laws and you know, he has ways that he hedges us in so that ultimately we can flourish. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Hey, you can flourish in this garden, but there's one rule: don't touch the tree of life and of death and life. And if you do, you will surely die. There was one prohibition, but that prohibition was not to hem them in. That prohibition was actually to help them to flourish. And I think that's the thing we've got to think about, especially in
Hmm.
light of vulnerable children and vulnerable families, that a lot of times we look at, oh, well, this is a libertarian way to look at this. We're not going to have too much government overreach. We're not going to have too many laws. And what we see in this story and what we see in real life that's happening in Washington, it has a very downward impact, especially on vulnerable children.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think I guess the technical term is comorbidity, but the idea that there's so many of these issues and things that run alongside the needs that ultimately end up in the child welfare system and that endanger children. And, I think too, and, something I really want to throw into the mix at the table is we, we try to address issues, right? Like even this article is the precipitation for this article is there are children dying in the system. But the problem is not children dying in the system. The problem is the lack of transformation and the lack of healing and the lack of community around those families. And we're the ones that bear that message. We're the ones that have that responsibility.
Yeah.
What Christians do. That's what the churches are. That's who we're to be. And yet we still struggle in so many ways to find relevance within the system. And family, I was having a conversation yesterday with a mutual friend of ours in Tennessee. And it's a person that is in the system and elevated in the system who also is a committed Christ follower,
Mm.
you know? And so this is not even the fact that there aren't people that follow, the system's not the enemy. The people that are working for the state are not the enemy. Many of them are, they believe just like we do, and they're seeking to, use their perch to walk those things out. But I think in many cases, even in those circumstances, we're trusting the wrong things to bring to families and children what they need. And I think as believers, part of the gift that we bring is that when we go as who we are. We go with
Hmm.
what we have. We don't try to pretend we're something else, and we don't try to pretend we have something else. The thing we have is we have the message of transformation. We have the gospel. And we have a promise that the church and the thing that we're a part of building, the people of God, is like that's going to endure. And so how do we how do we find ways in as believers to enter into this broken system and to begin to seek human flourishing, as you guys have talked about, the end that God has for us? What do you think?
Well, can I say, one thing
Yeah.
that might maybe helpful as I read through the article of
Mhm.
what's happening in Washington, and again, just I think a microcosm of the system at large. There's this like inherent tension, right? Children's rights, parental rights, and I think in a hyper polarizing moment in our country, like getting back to the conversation being like these adults are also just big children that had needs met
Mhm.
when they were little people, and this is about loving both through this
Uh,
moment. And so this isn't like my policy idea and your policy idea, although
mm,
that fleshes itself out, right? Like, because policy, we have laws and it happens, but like in the conversation, is there room for nuance to be like, we're actually
right.
both after the same thing?
That's right.
And can we work collaboratively and collectively to then pull, higher level to go like this? There's a battle against life flourishing in our country. Like, okay, and that takes a lot of different faces and forms. But in our little
Mhm.
niche area of child welfare, what does that look like? I don't know. I'm curious around that, I think. And especially like as the church engages, like, can that conversation be a little bit more nuanced there? And maybe that's not helpful. I don't know, but I'm
No,
curious there.
I think it's hugely helpful, and I'll just jump in and say I think something that has been something that we really have. I don't know, Herbie. I don't even know how to say this probably well, but God has caused us to be mindful of the fact that the gospel is for parents, children, everyone, and there is not a category of bad guys
Mm.
in this space. It's a category of people that are in need of grace and in need of transformation that can only come through Jesus. And I think one of the things we've done in the church to our detriment is that as Christians, we focused on children in the system rightly, but we've not really invited parents. We've not
Hmm.
really invited extended family into the same sort of gospel engagement. And I think, that's one of those places where instead of pointing the finger at the system, we kind of need to focus it back on us, because that's a fundamental thing that we're kind of calling shots that aren't ours to call, and we're sort of segregating and categorizing people in a way that isn't necessarily ours to categorize. We must carry the gospel into those places.
Yeah. I think one just like tiny niche policy thing that's been interesting here in Tennessee, where we're located, judges now in like a TPR setting they're not required to, but they can like adjudicate that biological family go through trauma informed training as like part of their
Mhm,
unification process. And I think that's just, again, you asked about the church, so this is
mhm.
I'm answering with a policy. So
Yeah,
we'll go back to that. But that's just like I guess maybe to capture imagination of what it could
I
look
love
like
that.
to just give a little bit of a tool to say, hey, there's families that are in situations, parents that are in situations that often no fault of their own are in multi-generations of trauma or situations that are not ideal to their flourishing and their children's flourishing, grandchildren's flourishing. How do we look at that and put little tools in places to say, hey, maybe this could be a helpful resource for mom and dad into the situation, you know? So to your point of the church, I mean, I think, gosh, I often find myself praying for our public servants that are in those spaces that do carry the light of Christ, and really just in the interactions that I can have and do have, how can I listen? How can I encourage? How can I really not, I mean, if asked my opinion, like maybe this could be helpful, but really more so like, gosh, you're on the front lines. Like, how can what's that like? You know, just trying to really, in that sense, I mean, right, the older I get, I think I'm really infatuated with how many questions Jesus asked, and then, of course, how quiet he really was in his public ministry, right? Until the words that he spoke, of course, were so searing and eternal in that way. How can I bring that into the space, and what would it look like for the church to kind of bring that prophetic silence into their engagement with the child welfare space? I think could be interesting. To your point, Rick, had a lot of ideas, or we've delineated a lot of categories, but maybe to be a bit more proactively listening could be interesting and powerful.
Herbie, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts, and we've got a really interesting site, and I don't want to make it too much about Washington State, but obviously we're licensed as an organization in Washington State.
Yeah.
And so not only am I reading this article, I'm also seeing the other side, which was a 72-page document that was sent by the state of Washington to service providers, especially looking at some of this evidence that was in this article, but looking at it from as a service provider, what are we asking you to do? And the first four points of that service plan are things that we're wanting to do. It's things that we're equipping churches in Washington State to do on behalf of kids in foster care today. And we have, I think last count, we have 28 kids in care through our organization in Washington State. I think what we've got to be careful about, and this is the reason why I think it's so important that as the church, we have to stay in these conversations. We have to have our voice heard, is because when we don't, the world starts to take over with its own logic. And so it's interesting that in trying to address child safety, how do we get children in safe places, safe homes? How do we make sure that kids are not languishing? And obviously, as we see the death rate spike in Washington foster care, how do we decrease that?
Yeah.
Number 5 on their list is we got to make sure that faith-based providers are not harmful and aren't using anti-LGBTQIA plus language. And so they're now requiring a 2-hour class for all foster families across the state of Washington that affirms gender identity, that affirms that there are multiple genders, there's multiple gender expressions. And again, I'm not trying to make this way, but I think this just impresses why, as the church, even when we read things and see things like this is not a time for retreat. This is a time for us to show that when Jesus entered into conversations like this, he did so with both grace and truth. And so we need to show the dignity of all children, all women, all people, all men, all of those that are made in the image of God, while still saying it's not going to help a child to also bring something that's not true to reality. It's not going to help vulnerable children to try to help them with their trauma, their pain, and their frustration by building on more trauma and more pain and more frustration. And so I guess to your original question, Dr. Rick, I would just say now is not a time for the church to retreat. Even when things are getting darker, even when things are getting harder, now is the time for us to enter in. And there may be just different places where we enter in. How do we enter in with those birth families? How do we care for our neighbor next door? These are things we've got to continue to press forward with.
Yeah. And, and I don't want to turn this into necessarily an infomercial, but I do, Herbie, there's something that people on our team have done that I think is an incredibly profitable, practical way of doing this. And it's taking advantage of a place where there is policy, and taking advantage of a place where there's existing structure, And it's, where we've helped churches to get engaged in teaching parenting classes that are a part of the system and a part of case plans, but churches are able to do it in a way that is biblically based and gospel centered. And, they're like, we're exercising in that religious liberty space where we're able to be who we are and carry the message that we have to carry, but we're also able to meet a need in the system. And we're able to directly engage with those families and bring the hope of the gospel to them, but also bring the community of the church to them. And I think, to your point, Herbie, part of what I'm afraid of if we back out of these spaces and we don't continue to engage in these conversations and have our voices heard in policymaking, our opportunities to be able to do those things are likely to shrink dramatically. And so, this is not so much about it's pushing an agenda that is mainly just trying to help us to continue to still, metaphorically, I hate to say this, but be at the table, right? We're trying to find ways to be able to do that. And I think as we, even as we're building, this show and building this audience together, part of what we want folks to do as you slide up and take a seat at the table is also realizing that taking a seat at the table means bringing your voice as a Christ follower to this space and advocating in a way that we continue to try to shape laws and try to shape the conditions and to really just be able to give us access and opportunity. And I think that's something that we sometimes we begin to shrink back from, and we start to think, hey, we don't have the power to do this. And truly the nation we live in, we do have the voice.
And I think like normalizing feeling like the chaos of it all
Mm.
is helpful. Like you're not going to arrive at having it figured out to take the next right step. Like we are living. I mean, I tell my kids often, like, I don't know why the Lord ordained it for such a time as this, but you have been born as warriors of the kingdom into a culture of chaos and confusion. And so that's it. Welcome. Here you are. You're not going to arrive at having it all figured out. And I'm probably speaking a little bit to myself here of like, okay, I need to know the whole strategic plan to take the first step. It's like, take the next right step, have the next right conversation. If you're in a state like, yes, reach out to Lifeline and all these great policy entities that have thoughts on and helpful, like, yeah, hey, let's move this direction or have a conversation around this. Just take one, again, back to like microdosing hope, like microdosing just take your light into the next right conversation. And I think that, our history as the church sometimes can be grand and grandiose, and maybe it's much smaller in this moment. But to your point, not retreating. Like we have to stay in the fight. And so, yeah, I don't know, maybe take courage.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually gonna turn the conversation a little bit, and I think it's funny where where we've gotten to in our discussion, because I think it naturally leads into this, that there's been a couple of podcasts recently and some public conversation around Ben Sasse, a former senator who received a diagnosis of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Ben's cancer is incredibly advanced, but Ben is someone who entered into the public space, ran for the U.S. Senate, spent a moment in that world, but didn't make a life and a career of that, of politics, but has been someone who's lived a life of public engagement here in the US. And so I think there's a great example in his life of how we do that. And we're not, but most of us that are sitting at this table right now, we're not going to run for the Senate. We're not going to, we're not going to be in a position like that to, to influence our country or our world, but we all are in positions of influence. Part of the couple of podcasts that Ben has been a part of recently, which I'm just struck by the fact that honestly he did this because he knows his time is very short, and he is, physically it was a real journey for him to even do this, but opening up his life to talk about his mortality in light of who he is in Christ, but then also to talk about our nation and this republic and our responsibility in the place that we've been given. Um, yeah, it just struck at a deep level. And I just, because we've all talked around this stuff so much, I'm just, I just want to hear your thoughts. Herbie, what, like, as you listened and engaged with Ben and just, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, it definitely looks at and you ask the Lord why certain people are diagnosed with terminal cancer. I know that Ben Sasse, as you even just hear him on these podcasts, the Lord has just blessed him with such intellect, such wisdom in choosing words and how to say things. I feel like he's actually, in some regards, one of the last true gentlemen,
Hmm.
gentlewomen that have been engaged with politics, where he didn't disdain his opponent, but he treated his opponent with kindness and civility. Yet, Ben Sass is just one of those people that when you're in the room with him, he's the smartest man in the room. Uh, and so there are several others in Congress today
Yeah.
that have this. Certainly, you know, I can think of some, but there it's a dying breed, and that's one of the things that just struck me is just the civility, the well spoken, how intelligent he was. But something that he said that, and Dr. Rick and Emily as well. I mean, y'all know this is kind of my theme. Is I loved what he says about redeem the time and use every moment for the glory of God, and it just reminded me, not to sing an old country song, but we got to live like we're dying, and we really do need to live each and every day going, every day's a gift. We don't know when the next diagnosis will come. We don't know what today will bring. And we have so many opportunities to share the hope and the love of Christ, to make a difference. And, I just, it really hit me, obviously, whenever we encounter the temporary nature of this world. But then I also just loved how Ben continued to say, I'm not living for this world, I'm living for another world. And as sad as it was also one of the most encouraging things I've listened to in a long time.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, such a gift that Ben has, Mr. Sass. I haven't had the privilege of meeting him. Like it sounds maybe that y'all have had, but a huge fan, and it's such a gift that he has given us, and that he's allowing these moments and these interviews. I think about his precious wife and his children in this season, and certainly our hearts and our prayers are with them, as I can, only imagine walking your loved one to the veil and then saying, see you in a little while. And so certainly I felt like I was on holy ground, kind of listening to the podcast the whole time, his interview. Someone who is as clear eyed. Yes, Herbie, echo everything you've said. Certainly there's almost like an ache in your heart as you watch it, because I really wish for more of that for this current expression of our country, for the country my children will inherit, and feel lost at knowing how we get back to that. But trust in a God, the same God that created Ben Sass isn't done creating more people like him with incredible intellect that are, the William Wilberforces of the moment of time that will, by God's grace, have the strategy and the winsomeness and imagination and courage in a moment in time, as Ben has done and continues to do in this moment. We're in the season of Lent currently while this is being recorded, and so I'm currently reading a book called The Power of Silence by Cardinal Sarah. He's a Catholic priest, and there's this great quote: "We forget that the source of our troubles come from the illusion that we are something other than mere dust." And I think that Ben is giving us a gift in this moment to remind us of, to dust from you have come, and to dust you will return, that we hear on Ash Wednesday, and we do everything, and all the powers that be in the world want to remind us that that's not true or try to distract us. And if we can hold that with hope, right? Not a, like, where it just kind of puts a damper on your entire life, but you hold with hope the fact that we are moving towards something so much greater. And we carry that infuses all the work that we get to do every day. And we don't, it's not fairy tale. Like we really
Yeah.
are moving toward when God will make this right, and when there won't be cancer and there won't be children living outside of family care, that will be eradicated. God will. I love what Scotty Smith, a family pastor here in Tennessee, is like. His interpretation of God will wipe every tear is literally like, I guess in the original text, like God's thumb will into your eye, the tear duct will not be needed. Like that's not even, it's wiped away. That idea. So anyway, such a gift. Felt incredibly privileged to just even sit at his feet to hear those words in this kind of moment in his life.
I'm going to confess. I'm going to confess to a thought that I had while I was listening to this. And it wasn't a thought. I mean, there was a conversation with the Lord that went something like this. It was like, God, why I so badly wanted this guy to be president.
Yeah.
But then I also have to say that the longer I listen to the interview, it doesn't matter. Ben is, he got into talking about the temporary nature of this republic and the things that are passing away and fading away in front of us. But I love the way he threaded the needle to say those things are not unimportant. Those things are not insignificant. Those things are things that God has given us, the responsibility to steward over and to participate in. And so that it was noteworthy to me that he did not regret his public engagement. He regretted his workaholic nature. He regretted some of the things that that he did and the way that he participated in that, but he didn't regret his public life. And I just like that really just resonated deeply with me. And I think speaks to what we've been talking about today about the fact that you may not be a senator, you may not be someone who is going to run for president, but that doesn't mean that you're not someone that can be engaged. And part of what God has given us and the gift of this place that we have been born and this place that we get to live is that we have the privilege of participating in the republic and in our governance, and that we have to bring all of us to that. And I think as believers, it's easy to be discouraged and it's easy to build up a fortress and go hide somewhere and not really want to be engaged. And I'll say thank you to both of you as friends, because I think I've benefited incredibly and have been encouraged by your example, because both of you don't just talk about it, you do it. And you're engaged in conversations that you have the opportunity to be engaged in, and you've been a great example to me in that. And so I'm really thankful to both of you for it. But maybe a parting shot as we as we get ready to close down and scooter chairs back from the table and go about our business for another week. What would, out of maybe all we've talked about today or just something that's on your heart, what would you have us leave with today?
I'll start. I mean, I think when you take both of these stories together, and even what you said, Dr. Rick, about Ben Sasse not having any regret, and even at the end of the podcast, one of the podcasts I listened to, he said something to the effect of, one of the reasons that I am going through all these clinical trials and trying to keep as much, have as much life left to live here, is one, for my 14-year-old son, but number two, so that I can be able to influence others as long as I possibly can. And I guess I would just say this: the time that you spend helping a vulnerable child will never be wasted.
Nice. Good word.
Very good. I think, well, it's been an honor to share this space with you guys and conversation. Rick, thank you for your kind words. I just trying to follow in y'all's footsteps, so it's an honor to be a part. I think the power of and the need of friendship and community in this space. I mean, Ben's life, the comrades he's had, he continues to have alongside of him. The touching on the first topic we talked about in Washington, the places that we can lean into those that are in the space with a listening and kind ear. But I think having your people beside you, I'm just reminded it being able to be in this conversation with you all, like it's hard work, it's lonely work at times, it's work that demands accountability in the sense of, yeah, where is that line of this is becoming this is too much the main thing, right? And we need to walk this back. You're bordering into workaholism, right? Like where are your people that you literally lock arms with and you move into this? And so I think, yeah, I don't know, for some reason that just came to mind. Like find your friends as you lean in.
Yeah. Well, that is, Emily, I resonate with that. That's part of the beautiful part of this is that, God gives you a passion and points you in a direction, but he also helps you find a people in the middle of it. And I'll just say to both of you, I'm glad that y'all are some of my people and that we get to do this, right? I feel like today got really heavy and I sort of felt NPR like in the way that, the way that we got into the rhythm of doing this. So folks, that's not always going to be the way. And we find the fun and the joy in the middle of this and a lot of other stuff, but we're just continuing to try to, have a conversation. And as you join with us, a couple of things. One, subscribe, help us out on YouTube and Apple and Spotify and all the places. We'd love for you to join us. Hit us up with comments. We'd love to hear from you. Part of this is we want to engage and we want to engage beyond the conversation here. We want to enlarge that. So we'd love your comments. We look forward to responding to them. We're going to be having other people that are going to join us from time to time in this as well. And so, maybe even that's you. Who knows? We'll see. I don't know. Maybe you don't want to, and that's okay too. but we'll be back here. Our rhythm is going to be every 2 weeks. We're going to be talking a little bit about one theme that we'll be talking about next time is kinship care and talking a little bit about families and just some things that are happening within the system, but also, ways that we can engage that as believers. Yeah, but we're really thankful for you. I'm grateful for my friends, Emily, Herbie. Thanks for being here. Chelsea will be back with us soon. She was not able to be here today, but she is certainly a part of this. And we invite you to come back and drag a chair up and join the table with us next time we get together. Thanks, y'all. Bye-bye.